Join us today. I'm Lois Beach. I'm the Consultancy and Partnership Manager for the Housing, Learning and Improvement Network, and I'll be chairing today's event. And really the theme for this session has come about following a range of recent research and sort of policy updates. I think, as many of you will know, in sort of June 2023, the Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act came into force. We really hope this is that this will be a pivotal piece of legislation that will improve the range of housing choices for people with a learning disability. This act, for those of you that aren't aware, is really intended to tackle sort of what's seen as problematic sort of exempt accommodation, which has kind of experience of potential, landlords that are charging higher rents for potentially poor quality accommodation. The aim is to kind of create more regulation oversight of this. So there'll be kind of new kind of licensing set up for local authorities, as well as kind of standards around support provided in supported accommodation, as well as kind of obligations on local authorities to develop kind of strategic supported housing plans, which will essentially look at what existing supply is out there for people with a learning disability and what is needed. So we're really hoping that this act will kind of enable better housing choices, as is the theme for this session, for people with a learning disability. So in light of this, we're going to hear from a range of speakers. So we're going to hear from Becca Cooper and Andy Pollen, who were both self-advocates from York People First. And they've recently been involved in some research conducted by Bristol and York University, supported by the Housing LIN, looking at the experience of people who are renting their own homes, so not in a supported housing setting, but living on their homes without being in supported accommodation. They're going to have shared their experiences of where they live and really the importance of getting people with learning disabilities involved in conversations about housing. Then we're going to hear from John Verge, who's the Chief Exec of Golden Lane Housing. He's going to share findings from some research that was commissioned by the Learning Disability and Autism Housing Network, of which John is the chair. That research was conducted again by the Housing LIN. That was looking at the scale and scope of the supported housing sector for people with learning disabilities. And this research, I guess, preempted the recent act. It'll be interesting to hear John's views kind of following that as well. And then lastly, we'll hear from Maggie Gilbert, who is the project coordinator for Better Living. And she'll kind of finish by challenging us to think about housing a bit differently with her concept of the Better Living Community Hub. And then that should leave us with about 20 minutes or so for Q&A and discussion at the end. But yeah, please do add your questions as we go along, and I will share those with the speakers at the end. So thanks everyone for joining us. I'm going to hand over to Becca and Andy as our first speakers. Thanks guys.
Right.
You want to start first, Becca? Or do you want me to start?
No, you start, Andy.
Right. My experience living on my own, I went to a conference a couple of years ago, met somebody called Gordon. He tried to move out to residential, and it inspired me to get living in my own place and really enjoying it. But if people don't want to live on their own, they don't have to. People should have choices where they live. But I really love my flat. I've been here 21 years and I'm really enjoying it. It'll be 21 years in January next year. Over to Becca.
Hello, my name's Becca. I'm black and proud. I came to England in 1976 with my mum and dad and sister. When I went to school, I was the only black person in a very white school. There was a lot of racism around in the 1980s. When I left school, I went to a college in Lancaster for 3 years. After this, I moved back to York, and then I moved into a residential care home. Then I went to see York People First, where I decided to start to speak up for myself. I think people with learning difficulties need to speak up more. I made this short film about my story, which will be played for you now. It's about 10 minutes. I would like to know what you think. What you think about it. So when it's finished, please ask me some questions and tell me what you think.
Becca, sorry to disappoint, but I think when we met before, we discussed that we potentially won't have time. We're not going to have time to share the video, but Sally's going to share the video in the chat, so everybody that's watching can view it later. And if there's any questions or comments that people want to give, they can come and email us and share those with us rather than showing it now, just because we've not got enough time for that. Are you happy to continue with the rest of your presentation? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. We need to speak up about housing issues for people with learning difficulties. How do people get support themselves? Not by their families or carers. How can people apply for a home with support? For example, you have to bid online for properties, which is difficult. Or you might not have the internet. We need to speak up about support. How do you find out about good support and where do you go? We need flexible support that lets us do what we need to do when we need to do it, not when staff rotas can fit us in. We need to speak up about paid jobs. Why are there now people with learning difficulties working in? Why are there no people with difficulties working in the services and organisations doing things for us? Why are so many of us doing voluntary work? We have skills. Doors should be open for us. We need to speak up about easy read information because we need it ourselves. Information that is not accessible excludes us, it keeps us out. So what do you think? Please ask me any questions. And we all
Well, thanks, Becca and Andy. That's really great to hear your kind of journeys about kind of housing, so particularly knowing that both of you, live on your own, but the support that you get really helps you to do that. And if there's any questions for Becca and Andy about their experiences, about where they live, or about their views about how to get, people with learning disabilities voices heard more, please do put them in the chat box and I will direct them to them later on in our question sessions. I can see some questions coming up that I'll ask you guys about at the end. Okay, I will. Thanks so much, guys. That was really helpful to sort of set us off. What I'll do is I'll hand over to John Verge. John, you can introduce yourself and your presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Lois. I'm just checking you can see that all right. Brilliant, excellent. Oh, that's a good start. Well, it's great to be here this afternoon. As Lois introduced myself, John Verge. I'm CEO, Chief Exec of Golden Lane Housing, and we are a UK specialist housing association. And I'm also here today as chair, as Lois said earlier, of the Learning Disability and Autism Housing Network. We are a coalition of over 25 housing associations who provide accommodation for people with learning disability and autistic people. I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon to share our latest research that we commissioned HousingLIN to undertake to give us that insight into our sector. And importantly, as I'll come on to later, it sets out the kind of future demand for England. I'm also going to share with you some key recommendations for both government, local authorities and housing providers that we believe will support and sustain good quality housing for people with a learning disability and autism that is so desperately needed by individuals, their families and commissioners. So I'm going to share some of those key findings, and what HousingLIN were able to establish is that there's over 1.4 million adults with a learning disability or autistic adults in the UK. But this particular research focuses on the over 150,000 adults who receive some form of commissioned care and support in England. So whilst this report is solely about England, I appreciate there may be people hearing this today or hearing it back that may be from other parts of the UK. But I think certainly some of the recommendations we come on to will be relevant for all parts of the UK. A key finding of our research was that there are over 35,000 people with a learning disability and autistic people living in supported housing. That's where they receive care and support to live independently as possible in their own home. And of that supported housing, around 2/3, 66% of that accommodation is where people share with other people. And around 1/3, around 34%, people live in self-contained accommodation where they have their own front door. Now, this next chart sets out where people who are receiving care and support, where they're actually living. So you can see from the pie chart that the 35,000 people who are living in supported housing, that is around 23% of that 150,000. And there's an equivalent number who are actually living in mainstream accommodation. And we believe that that's predominantly going to be housing association and council housing accommodation. What we have seen over the last 10 years is a reduction in those living in residential care. So there's currently just under 15% of people living in residential care. What we have not seen any changes over the last 10 years is those people actually living with family, friends or informal carers. And there's still around 36% of people living with carers. Now, for many people, that is the right solution. It's where they want to live. But what we do know is more and more people with a learning disability and autistic people who need care and support actually want to live independently. I'm going to pick up some other key aspects of the research. It's probably not surprising, but our research does confirm that of those people living in supported housing, those 35,000 people, over 80% are actually living in housing that is a tenant with a registered provider, a housing association. Other key piece of findings from our research is the number of hours that our people are receiving in supported housing. Now, over 75%, over 3/4 of people living in supported housing receive over 25 hours a week support. And in fact, over 43% receive more than 100 hours of care and support a week. What our research also shows is that over 83% of those people living in supported housing receive housing benefit at higher levels. Some of you may have heard the term specified accommodation. It's a housing benefit term, but it's really important to note that people who are living in supported need the protection of housing benefit paid at a higher level. The other term that I refer to at the bottom, specialised supported housing, now that is a term that's used by the regulator of social housing, who has oversight over housing associations. And housing associations who have not received any grant funding can actually charge higher levels of rent. And what our research shows is nearly 60% of rent that is charged to those people living in supported housing is being charged at that higher level. What our research also showed is that there was over 5,500 new tenancies created by housing associations and councils over the last 5 years. But of the money spent, only 13% of that came from government grant, housing grant funding. The most of the money came from private finance. What HousingLIN were also able to do is make some predictions on future need. And this was based on increased number of people with learning disability or autistic people requiring care and support, commission funding, but also increasing demand for supported housing. And over the next 15 years, it's estimated by HousingLIN that in England, we're going to need nearly 2,000 new tenancies each year created. So certainly between 1,800 and 2,100 units of new supported housing. And that's going to cost, and what we need in terms of public and private finance is over £340 million a year. What we want to do with our research, and what we always wanted to do with our research, is actually come up with some key recommendations. So in terms of recommendations for government, we certainly feel that there's a need for more feasible grant levels to actually deal with the demand going forward. And that grant funding comes from Homes England in England and the Greater London Authority in London. And at the moment, the current levels on offer don't actually work for housing providers to develop the type of accommodation that they're being asked to develop. We're also recommending to government that they need to set and publish annual targets for supported housing for people with a learning disability and autistic people. Whilst there are targets nationally for supported housing across all different groups, there isn't anything at the moment for people with learning disabilities or autistic people, and we think that's really important. We also feel that there needs to be reform of a 20-year-old supported housing rent rules for housing association. Now, we believe that the current affordable social rent rules have actually led many long-standing housing associations to stop developing, and because of the limited access to grants in our sector, we believe that a lot of lower cost accommodation hasn't been provided. Now, we see in Wales grant developing housing associations being able to charge rents that reflect the actual level of grant subsidy they receive. And we would really like to see that kind of approach in England. The third recommendation that we're making to government is to actually maintain the current housing benefit regime, the rules that currently exist to enable higher rent levels to be paid in certain types of supported housing. Now, we've shown from our findings that over 80% of tenants who live in supported housing actually receive those higher level of rents. So what we believe that we need is a system to support higher rent levels, but there needs to be appropriate scrutiny, oversight of those rent levels to make sure that they are justifiable and the evidence to support the rents that are being charged. Our final recommendation, and it does come on the back of the new act that Lois referred to, is that we welcome the new Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act. We want to ensure that it introduces the right level of oversight to drive up national standards, support the strategic planning for local authorities and health authorities, and actually recognise that there is a difference in lifetime commissioned supported accommodation from short-term non-commissioned housing. So when they introduce local licensing schemes, we want to make sure that those arrangements are right for our part of the sector. Now, I'm just going to run through 3 recommendations for local government that we've made. Firstly, as part of the new act, there will be a requirement to develop and publish strategies for the provision of supported housing every 5 years. But what we want to see is very much a specific targeted strategy that also covers people with learning disabilities and autistic people. And with any strategy, we're only going to provide real solutions if local authorities and health authorities work together with key partners, such as housing associations and charities. Our final recommendation is to actually make better use of the accommodation that we already have. Now, our report shows that the findings were that there's around 10%, so 1 in 10 current tenancies are vacant. So we believe that can be a better use of the current accommodation that's available. So we think that's really important. That should feed into the new strategic plans of local authorities. And finally, we believe that housing associations have got a critical role to play as well. So they need to work with local authorities to help plan for supported housing. We certainly feel that supported housing providers should embrace the new national standards and look to exceed them so that they're providing the best quality accommodation and services possible. I've just talked about the higher rent levels that are often charged in supported housing schemes, and we believe that supported housing have got a duty to make sure that there's full transparency in the costs that they're charging, but also importantly evidence the value for money, the actual benefits both to the individual and to the public purse that we feel good quality supported housing can make. So I've done the headline findings. I've gone through the 12 recommendations for government, local authorities and housing providers. You can find out more information at our website. If you put in the QR code on your smartphone, you'll find details. And I'm sure, Lois, you'll be sharing the links through the HousingLIN website as well. So I'm going to stop sharing and over to you, Lois.
Well, thanks, John. And yeah, that was a really, really great overview of the research that we completed. So thanks so much. Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get into some of the questions around, what's surprising, what we kind of weren't expecting, what we were expecting a little bit later. But in the meantime, please do put any questions that you've got in the Q&A box and we can have a discussion about that later. Yeah, it was really, really important research that we completed. Brill. I will hand over to Maggie to introduce herself as our final speaker. Thank you very much, Maggie. Do share what you're going to discuss with us today.
Thank you very much. We can put the second one up already, I think, Sally. Yes, my name is Maggie Gilbert, and I am the coordinator of this new charity, which is incorporated organisation. The reason for my involvement is this beautiful young lady that you can probably see on your screens. This is my youngest child. She became very severely brain damaged at the tender age of 9 weeks in hospital, where she was left to fit in a coma for 3.5 hours without treatment. And it has just destroyed her brain. And I have spent most of her life setting up and running from home local charities to make the provisions that she needed and other people like her also needed. So I've become very aware of issues that relate to people who've got a wide variety of young people in their family who've got disabilities of one sort or another. At the moment, according to the CQC, I'm an expert by experience, which is what sounds good, doesn't it? Anyway, this is my reason for being involved with disabilities and with charities and so on. And there's been a heck of a lot of experience coming from having a child this severely disabled in the family. And when you have a child with disability, you say a child with disability, everybody goes, oh, and they all want to help. But they only a child for a very short period of time. They are an adult for a heck of a long time. And once they become an adult, they fall off the planet. People don't want to know. There's a heck of a lot of stigma attached to it. You walk down the road, people cross over the street so they don't walk past you. it really changes everything when they become an adult, and that is not nice to experience. So a lot of people, you can have the next slide, Sally. A lot of people, I hear them saying in the Housing LIN events, that community is the answer, and I agree totally. I know my daughter would be happy as Larry to spend half her time just sitting in Gatwick Airport watching people, because she thinks people are kind of pretty amazing, and she loves music. If there's music in the background, super. But she now has to use, unfortunately, residential care. And that is like a mini asylum. They closed all the big ones, thankfully, but the little ones they've now created are incredibly isolating. The only people she sees, apart from staff, are us. People don't go in. People walk around it. They don't want to know, which is terribly sad. Now, on my last project that I did, I registered it for all children up to the age of 8 and people of all ages with a disability, because the developmental age of somebody doesn't necessarily match their physical one. My daughter is about 18 months, 2 years old, developmentally. So like a baby, she wants somebody to play with her all the time. She wants music and all the rest of it. But she's actually 45. So very, very different. She's a very, very strong 2-year-old. But community is the best answer. And by registering the last place that I did, which was actually a community hub in a way, because we'd been collecting things for a toy and leisure lending library until we had so many that everybody's garages were sort of overflowing. So we needed a building. I found a building that was unused by the NHS, and we were allowed to move into it. And we had the soft play area, we had the sensory room and the glowing ball pool, and we had the toy and leisure lending library, etc., etc. And the community were there like a rocket, because you offer them something they want at a low price and they'll be there. And by coming in there, they were accidentally meeting people with a disability. Now, the children that came in actually didn't really notice. They would say things like, why is he not talking? Well, he can't. Oh, okay then. And that's it. End of problem for them. Well, the parents were walking around. But I did see 2 children, one with and one without disabilities, one day fighting over a bicycle, a little tricycle in the garden. I thought, well, keep an eye on this so they don't kill each other. And the kids sorted it out, so end of problem. And the mother of the non-disabled child was sitting near me, and she said, oh, just look at that. You know, they're just children, really, aren't they? Yes, dear. You've had a light bulb moment. They are, and they just have different abilities to other children. But by mixing them up in a leisure facility, people accept them. If they can see them having a good time, leaping on a trampoline, having a lot of fun, laughing their little heads off, they realize they're just people. And it makes a world of a difference. So if you look up Better Living, you will see, I believe, you will see our website is on that slide there. So do look us at betterlivingcio.org, okay? Look us up and you'll see all the things we'd like to do. So we'll have the next one, Sally. We want to bring people together. We want to bring the community to our elderly and our disabled people, because they actually share a heck of a lot of issues, the elderly and the disabled. They are abandoned in the community because, well, hey, they're old, you know. Well, I'm getting old, as my children keep reminding me, but, you know, I'm not that old. And when I'm really old, I don't think I really want to just be left to sit in a kind of lounger chair looking at a lawn, or by myself, because that does not interest me. Even though I love gardening, I would want to do something to it. But the elderly would also love to use, for example, a sensory room, to lie in a leaf chair with the music and lighting. I'm sure they would enjoy that. And there's an awful lot of elderly people. Did you watch that program, which was, I thought, brilliant? Old Folks' Homes for 4-year-olds that was on the television. And it went to show people how much every generation has got to give to another generation. The little ones came out of there bubbling and laughing and having a great time. The older people actually were thinking about things completely differently. Every generation has got something to share with another one. And to prevent them from doing that, I think is terrible. A lot of older people can't leave a residential home without being taken. Now, if there's actually already a wonderful community centre that they can walk into by just dragging a carer with them, they can sit and have a cup of coffee in the cafeteria, and they can just chat to people at a social level that they hadn't really met before. And, oh, I saw you yesterday, didn't I? They can stagger down the garden, and all the food waste can go to some chickens at the bottom of the garden, which is the best recycling system ever, because they turn them into eggs, which is super. How many people, older people, do you know where the last friend they had on earth was the dog or the cat? They go into a residential home, they can't have one. No pets allowed. Now, that kind of community centre we're talking about, you can have petting animals coming in. People can have a relationship. You can have dogs that are being trained for blind people that need to be around other folk. You can actually enrich people's lives massively. And they can choose whether to sit on a green lawn or whether they can sit on the other lawn and watch everybody else's kids on the swings laughing their little socks off, or whether they can use the things within the building itself. And you can change the slide there, Sally. Another thing that could come into the hub, as we call it, are things like, okay, you could have a GP 1 day a week, for example. You could also have people like osteopaths, reflexologists, probably physiotherapists. All these people have to provide free treatments to people when they're finishing off their training. So why not give free treatments to the disabled and the elderly? And why not? They'd love it, I'm quite sure. These things actually cost quite a lot of money. You can bring in foreign students. You can encourage people who are seniors in school who are doing community work. What kind of community work are they doing if they're not working with the community? Yeah. Now, there's a lot of talk as well at the moment, I know, about independent living for people with disabilities. This was actually suggested for my daughter. I say she has no speech, semi-continent, needs help with everything. Oh yes, we've found a wonderful flat for her, and I said that's ridiculous. You should have to lock her into it. Oh, are you there? I've disappeared. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see you. Yeah.
Oh, good. My computer's gone peculiar. They've said, yes, this will be wonderful for her. I said, well, she'd need to be locked in. Oh, no, we wouldn't lock her in. I said, well, she'd be under the first bus. Oh, no, but we'll put a number system by the door. I said, well, then you are locking her in because she could never work it out. Apparently, the CQC would not be allowed to go in and check on her because they would have to be invited in by her. Well, she can't talk. So I do think people need to be very aware of all the negative systems that exist around independent living for people with severe learning disabilities, because it is not appropriate for all of them, but it is a way of moving care costs onto the council for housing systems. And I do think people need to be aware of that, and they need to ensure that it is totally appropriate for their little person. It suggested that people should have skills, who they do have skills, and that doors should be opened for them. Yes, they should. Now, if you've got a cafeteria and you've got animals on site, you can have a farm shop, you can have all sorts of things going on where people can have a job if they're capable of doing one, and they can work with other members of the community, and they can be helped by them as well. And I think these things are terribly important. Do you want to put the last slide on, Sally? I'm just concerned about timing. I can't see what's going on at all. Can you see the slides and so on? My screen is black.
Yes, yeah, we're on the last slide there.
But you can see. Oh, that's
yes, yeah, thank you.
Ah, great. Wonderful. So I just say check the appropriateness of what is offered to them. And this bit about, yes, the community is the answer, let's take them into the community, I think is totally wrong, because they take people, the elderly and the disabled, out in groups, which scares the rest of the community half to death. And it also means that nobody else goes into the community centre because they're all in there having lunch today, so we'll stay clear. So you're not actually bringing them into the community, you are bringing them to use community facilities on their own. And what we need and what we feel is the right thing to do is to actually bring them into the community, or bring the community in to them, which is only going to happen if you are offering something that is exciting for everybody. And then everybody can have a good time, and we can maybe, if we're lucky, reduce the stigma of disability and old people and so on, and people actually can be happy together. I think would be a wonderful idea. And if you check out our website, you'll see the million of ways that we reckon you can do this. But as soon as we got registered, COVID hit, and we weren't allowed to bring anybody together anyway. And every vacant building in the country was suddenly filled up with people with COVID. So it's actually snookered us a tad. But we will get there, we will. And we think that it's something that developers ought to consider as a new way of making provisions for housing for both the elderly and the disabled, link them to a hub, bring the community in and see how much happier people are. And I believe that the care will be cheaper because you'll encourage voluntary help, and I think it will be better for everybody, and it could easily be replicated all over the country, all over the world. Anyway, there you go.
Brill. Thanks so much, Maggie. Yeah, really, really interesting to hear your views. And yeah, we, research that the HousingLIN kind of conducts a lot is really shines a light on the importance of. You can hear us as well as
I can hear you, but I've just got a blank screen. It's horrible.
Oh no, I'm sorry. But yeah, obviously where people live is obviously really important to them, and that aspect of community. So yeah, any kind of housing models that we can think about that enable that to happen more. Yeah, really, really, really happy to advocate for those. So we've come through to our kind of Q&A sessions. So I've got some questions that that have come in the chat box, and Becca and Andy, I've got some questions for you first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're happy. So thinking about when you've moved into your home, did you have other options of where you might live? How did you decide on where you live now?
They wanted me to move into Acombe, which is a part of York, and I said no. I still want to live in New Wales-Wick.
Yeah, so you did have...
If I hadn't said that, I don't know where I'd be living.
Yeah. So the fact that you were able to speak up for yourself was really important about the location.
Because if people who haven't got speech,
Mm-hmm.
which live on their own, how would they get their views across without, well, family support or whatever? But
Yeah.
yeah, and I've got good neighbours as well.
Great. And how about you, Andy? You obviously moved 21 years ago, but were there other options that you looked at, Andy?
No. I went to the doctors. The doctor said when I was in residential where Becca lived, they said it wasn't good for my health. And I went to Straightest Roundtrees and I found an empty flat, and it took me a year to move in. 2003 on New Year's Day.
That is quite a long time though, a year, isn't it? But
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're both happy where you are now. Did you
Yeah.
did you ever want to live? You obviously both live on your own. Was that
Yeah.
really important to you to live on your own rather than
Yeah.
with other people?
Yeah, to have more choices and bring more friends around bring more friends to stay and stop over.
Yeah.
And
what helps you to live on your own? What is the support that you receive? Is that important in terms
the
of
right support?
The right support. People
And
to listen.
as well.
People who listen to you. And
Yeah.
when you was in residential, you have to go back like at 8 o'clock and stuff, and go back for the changeover. But you don't. When you live on your own, you don't have to do that. That doesn't happen.
So you like the independence.
You can go when you want.
Yeah. You have more choices.
Yeah. And how important is York People First for you guys as an organisation?
It's a good organisation to speak up, to say how we feel about everything in the city for everyone. But we can speak for ourselves.
Not for everyone, for yourself.
For ourselves, but we can't speak for all of York.
No.
I'm fed up with that. And I sort of ask about black and ethnic minority, and they all look at you and go, well, you can move to Leeds. I'm going, no.
Yeah. So people making assumptions, you don't want that to happen. Yeah. Okay. Thank you both. That's really helpful to hear your perspectives. If there's any other questions that other speakers want to ask Becca and Andy, please do feel free to do so. We've got a question otherwise directed, I think, for John about the Learning Disability and Autism Housing Network. So I think it's a bit around, you wanting to influence provision in Wales and Scotland as well. Perhaps you can give an answer to that. And I think somebody else has asked around how you're hoping to kind of use the research to influence kind of government and local government as well. So
I can pick up that. Yeah, Lois. I mean, certainly of the 25 or so members of the housing network, a number of the providers, including Gold Lane Housing, provide accommodation in other parts of the United Kingdom. So Gold Lane Housing, for example, we provide accommodation in Wales and Northern Ireland, and a number of our members also work in Scotland. We do have a recent new member who's joined us who solely work in Wales. So we're starting to get that insight. What I would say is, whilst clearly in the last 5 years since we were established, we've been focusing our conversations with government and predominantly the rules in England, bringing on new members, such as the Welsh Housing Association. I'm certainly be keen to talk to any Scottish housing associations as well. We are really keen to make sure that whilst recognising the devolution means that there are nuances in terms and differences in terms of funding, the housing benefit rules are the same in England and Wales, for example. So there are crossover. And in terms of the influencing and campaigning work, yes, clearly one of the things we wanted to do from the research is actually to make real change. So both before the launch, and we were very pleased that Bob Blackman, who is MP for Harrow in North London, whose private members bill, the Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act came from, he and Clive Betts, who's also the chair of the Select Committee, the committee in Parliament that has oversight of the Department of Levelling Up, which has responsibility for housing. They both supported the launch in the House of Commons of the research back in July. And before the launch and since the launch, we've had conversation with all parts of government, all the different parts of government that influence both the current rules and future rules. Last Monday, I had a meeting and I met all of the key civil servants across the government departments that are responsible for housing, for funding. So Homes England and the Greater London Authority I mentioned earlier, who fund housing for housing associations, NHS England. And we also had the local governments association. So it was we had over an hour and a half to talk through not just what I've gone through this afternoon, but actually some of the detailed solutions that we think could really make a difference. So we're really pleased that it's landed really well. People are both pleased to see the research, because to give some context, a lot of the information was already out there, but Ian, Lois and the team at HousingLIN kind of came together, brought that information in one place. And we also did, and HousingLIN also did a survey of housing associations as well to get that detailed information. And I see, Lois, that there was a question around, in terms of the research project, the level of detail, can it be broken down in the regions? If you go to the link that Sally put in earlier, you'll see that there is a summary of the report. And I think for most people, that will be the level of detail that you'll need. It's about 12, 13 pages long, but there is the very detailed research report from HousingLIN. And you'll see within that, 65 plus page report, we were able to break down in terms of regionals aspects of some of the questions that we looked at.
Well, thanks, John. Yeah, thanks for answering that question as well. Just to echo, exactly what John said, that information is available. Our data analyst, Darius Gagliardi, was really pivotal in kind of doing that demand estimation even. So yeah, do check out the link that Sally's put in the chat there. Okay, Brill, we've got another question that perhaps I might focus, Maggie, I might ask you to have a little answer with this one, but we've got a question from Dave Jenkins, and he's talking about how we ensure people with learning disability or autistic people to be supported to navigate the kind of tricky housing landscape. Are there, I guess, obviously you're sort of, you've got a daughter with learning disabilities. Are there things that you think would have been helpful for you when thinking about how to navigate that system? It sounds like you're kind of trying to set something new up, essentially, that might go around that system. But is there anything that would be helpful for you in terms of, how to support people navigate that?
Well, I think people need to be well aware of potential problems relating to whatever type of housing is being proposed for that individual. You really need to think it through. And they actually told me, with the independent living, that my daughter, and she can choose her own menu. I said, well, actually, she's drunk domestos and eaten dog turds. I'd rather she didn't choose her own menu, please. I don't want her choosing her own food. Like a baby, everything goes in her mouth. No, that's dangerous. But the problem that we find is that residential care in this country at the moment is absolutely awful. An awful lot of people who are employed as carers, in inverted commas, don't care at all. And when you've got somebody who's very severely disabled, as my daughter is, she can't tell you, those people were horrid to me. She can't say that. Her only way of communicating is to actually shred her clothes or hit somebody, because she doesn't have any speech. And every now and then I'm given a whole black bag full of shredded clothing because she's not happy. And I do think We need to look at something totally different for residential care, where they can actually, you can reinstate the element of choice for people such as my daughter, who can't talk to you at all, for people who are old, and actually maybe getting dementia. But the word choice doesn't seem to be in the vocabulary anymore for people who have really got quite severe special needs of one sort or another. They can't choose anymore. Choices are all made for them, and that's it, whether you like it or not. That's not good.
Yeah. And Becca and Andy, I think Andy's just gone, but maybe Becca, when you were finding where you live now, who helped you to find that accommodation? What was the
social
main
workers?
Social workers, yeah. Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, social workers and yeah.
Was it quite? Did you
seem to be in a lot of people's with learning difficulties life? Maggie, how old is your daughter?
She's actually physically 45, but developmentally 18 months to 2 years. No speech, semi-continent, help with absolutely everything. No, she's just a huge baby and incredibly strong.
Right. And
you have to get her to agree with you, otherwise she isn't going to happen.
Oh, right. So
has anyone done a communication board for your daughter?
Has anybody done what? Sorry, dear.
Like a communication board with pictures, then she can point out what she wants.
They don't care. They abandon her at every opportunity. She's isolated as anything within the home. You know, when she comes home with us, she cannot stop laughing. She just loves every minute of it. And we have her out at least once a week. But she cries getting back into the car to go back. She's hating it. And we know a lot of things that aren't right. But we can't prove quite a lot of them because we're not there all of the time. And she needs to be saved.
Does she belong to a self-advocacy group?
Self-advocacy? Well, that would mean she could talk, but no, she can't.
Well, no, I know she can't, but she could somehow get her voice across, and then the self-advocacy group could help her tell
how she feels.
Yeah.
Well, we know how she feels because it's pretty obvious by her behavior. And that is how you can tell that she's not happy.
But if you need any help, just send us an email.
We need help, young man. We need help. I need to get her out of there. I need a social worker who'll do her job, would help me. And we need to set up this sort of our project so that she can be the first person in it, because she'd love every minute. She'd love it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, Becca and Andy. Yeah, it sounds like that. Obviously, York People First has really helped.
We could help you.
Yeah.
If you wanted it.
Yeah, but I don't live in York, darling. I'm down near Epsom Racecourse.
Okay.
Oh,
it's a bit of a hike.
Yes. Well, no, you could try give us a sort of like email or something. Email Stephen.
See what we can do.
Yeah, we can share contact details, definitely.
Yeah. Yes,
but
indeed.
Yeah,
the
more help, the better, really.
Always important.
So,
yeah. Working together.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
I think we've got another question I wanted to ask, because I think some of the research it indicated, I think John, you mentioned, that we've got 10% kind of vacant properties within sort of supported housing sector. So we've got some questions around kind of how, why I guess some of the properties are vacant, and what can be done about that. Is it around properties not being what people want, or those sorts of things? Are you happy to answer some of those questions?
I'm happy to pick that up. There was a question around, will we have to establish the reasons for it? We didn't actually ask specifically the reasons. I mean, I think a lot of what comes out of the research is maybe some follow-up work that we want to do over the coming years about specific questions like that, and also about understanding better the impact of good quality supported housing. But what we do know, because many of our members also take part in benchmarking clubs when they look at their voids compared to other organisations in the sector, is that yes, I would agree with the premise that in some cases it can take longer to find someone appropriate to move into a shared accommodation, because the people that are already living in the accommodation should have the say about who they live and share with. But I think our experience is most of the accommodation that we have, and we're probably a similar proportion of between shared and self-contained. So we certainly got more shared than self-contained accommodation, but most of our accommodation does eventually get filled. So I think the 10% is more the time it takes to identify the right person. Often people need to whether it's families or individuals, work with adult social care commissioners, health authority commissioners to agree the funding. So I think there are lots of reasons for it. It is certainly the case that we've seen in recent years a desire for more self-contained accommodation where people have their own front door, but people still want communal space and areas to share with as well. So I think housing associations always explore and are prepared to leave accommodation vacant as long as possible. But I also would say that even in self-contained accommodation, it can take time to, as I said, identify people as well to move in. So I think this is where the local authorities need to have a better understanding, not just of what new accommodation they need, but will actually have a record of all of their current accommodation and support more strategic planning around using the accommodation that's available. But clearly sometimes it won't be suitable, and that's where housing associations will look at reproviding the existing accommodation.
Yeah, thank you. I thought one of the sort of interesting things that came out of the research, and I think obviously, so for everyone's benefit, we did, as John said, we did like a survey of supported housing providers, and they were looking at, okay, in how many units have been developed since I think 2017 or something like that, and actually quite a number of the kind of new builds were actually still kind of within that shared model, which I thought was very interesting, considering what we learn from qualitative research that we do with people with learning disabilities about that drive to, and we've got Andy and Becca here that live on their own and really want to live in self-contained accommodation. So I thought that was interesting.
I think there is still certainly, we're finding, speaking to individuals, families and commissions, there still is a need that's reducing over time, but still a desire and need for shared accommodation. And I think it also depends on the age of the individual. We see a lot of people perhaps move out of home for the first time who don't want to automatically go straight into their own self-contained flat. They may want to, but they may not. And also we're housing a lot of people, older people with learning disabilities, people perhaps were previously living with older carers they've reached their 50s and 60s themselves. And again, they don't necessarily want to live on their own. So what I think you've seen in the last 10 years, though, the shared accommodation that's been provided is much smaller in scale. So it tends to be perhaps 2 or 3 people compared to maybe 25 years ago, 5 or 6 people sharing. So we're seeing a gradual and some of the accommodation can be shared, but actually have good space, using annexes and people having their own living space. So I think there are different models that housing associations and councils are exploring. And I suppose the other interesting thing we found is that the cost of actually providing self-contained versus shared accommodation wasn't hugely different. In some cases, it's actually sometimes more expensive to provide shared accommodation, but that often is to do with the requirements of the individual. So we have a lot of people who've got physical disabilities, so they will need bathing facilities and really well adapted properties. So it isn't always the case that self-contained is more expensive than shared.
Well, Lois, what about an accessible lease tenancy agreement?
certainly that's important. Certainly we have.
Yeah,
have
so how come you
accessible-
don't get it? How come you don't get it? Nobody does it.
Well, we certainly, a number of our members do accessible tenancies, and not just easy read, but visual and video. So there's different ways of being able
Yeah,
to
but it's not
tenancy.
actually offered.
Yeah.
Not by everybody. No, that's right. That's not everybody.
No, what I'm saying is landlords don't offer them.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a varying. Yeah, some landlords do and some landlords don't. Those landlords, Becca, that belong to the networks that John mentioned, as the Learning Disability and Autism Housing Network, will offer that as a necessary kind of requirement. So easy read, information. But you're right, not everybody does offer that. We we would advocate for people to see the importance of that, for sure. Brill. Okay, I'm very conscious we've come up to 5 o'clock and we're running over time. So I think unless there's any other kind of comments that our speakers wanted to raise, then feel free to do so now. If not, thank you very much everybody for coming along and speaking and sharing your views. It was a really, really useful session, and yeah, really great to be part of the research with the LDHN. So really pleased that John, you were able to share that. But yeah,
What's the LDHN?
Sorry, I knew you were going to do that, Becca, because Learning Disability and Autism Housing Network. I thought, oh, I've said it before, so I'll say it abbreviated.
Yeah.
But can't get away with it ever. That just shows you no jargon ever. Brill.
Exactly.
All right, well, really great to see you all, and thanks very much everyone for joining online. Really enjoyed the session, and see you next week. We've got another happy hour next week. Brill. Nice to see you. Bye.
Yeah, bye. Bye.